Imagine, just for a second, one of the most catastrophic, life-altering events in modern history. We're talking about displacing millions of people, totally restructuring two major nations, and leaving a legacy that still dominates global geopolitics today. Now imagine that the blueprint for all of this was handed to one single guy. A man who had essentially zero experience with the region, didn't speak a word of the language, and get this, had never even set foot in the country he was about to slice in half. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the staggering historical reality behind the drawing of the 1947 India-Pakistan border. It's a story of an impossible task that literally changed the world overnight. Let's get into it. The sheer absurdity of this whole situation really comes down to just one single number: 5. Cyril Radcliffe, the British lawyer tasked with this monumental job, was given just 5 weeks to literally cut the country in half. 5 weeks. He had to study, negotiate, and finalize a boundary through two of the most complex, intertwined regions on the entire planet, Punjab in the west and Bengal in the east. I mean, think about it. That's less time than it takes most people to plan a simple wedding, and he was expected to determine the fate of tens of millions of people. Part 1. The 10-month rush. Britain's abrupt exit. So, setting the scene, by the summer of 1947, a pretty much bankrupt British Empire had absolutely no appetite for holding on to colonial India. The original transfer of power was actually scheduled for June 1948, but Viceroy Lord Mountbatten abruptly moved it way up to August 15, 1947. This sudden deadline shift, it sparked a fierce historical debate that's still going on today. On one side, you have Mountbatten's official reasoning. The claim here was that communal tensions and riots were escalating so incredibly fast that waiting another year would just cause more bloodshed. Basically, ripping the bandage off quickly was the humane choice. But on the other side, there is a highly critical counterargument raised by a lot of historians. They argue this was really just a self-interested move by Britain to manufacture a fast, cheap exit, allowing them to wash their hands of the mess without paying for a drawn-out occupation. Now, we aren't here to declare a winner in this debate, but it's absolutely crucial to understand both of these perspectives when you're looking at why this deadline was so impossibly tight. Moving on to part 2, 5 weeks, 1 pencil, the unqualified architect. Now, Cyril Radcliffe was a highly respected lawyer, sure, but he had absolutely zero background in geography, cartography, South Asian history, or colonial administration. Nothing. He was chosen precisely because of his ignorance. British officials actually believed that because he'd never been to India, he'd be completely neutral and free of any bias toward any group. But as history usually shows us, neutrality does not equal competence. And this beautifully illustrates the problem. The boundary commissions for Punjab and Bengal were technically designed for balance, right? 2 judges from the Indian National Congress and 2 from the Muslim League. But the result on the ground? Deadlock. Every single time. Because the local representatives just couldn't agree on where the line should go, Radcliffe, this entirely unqualified outsider on a 5-week deadline, suddenly became the final deciding vote for millions of people. The mandate on paper sounded simple enough. Separate Muslim-majority areas from Hindu and Sikh-majority areas. But here's the thing, real life doesn't organize itself into neat religious blocks. It just doesn't. Radcliffe was forced to use incomplete, deeply flawed census data to divide communities that were completely intertwined. We're talking about people who shared irrigation canals, massive railway junctions, and literally centuries of collective history. Trying to untangle an entire cultural and economic ecosystem with a pencil in just a few weeks, it was an impossible task. And this whole impossible situation leads to some incredibly controversial decisions. Take the fate of the Gurdaspur district, for example. Awarding this mixed population area to India critically gave them land access to the highly strategic region of Jammu and Kashmir, which brings up a massive historical question, one you really have to stop and think about. Is it even possible to draw a truly neutral line when the outcome dictates strategic control of such a crucial region? Did geopolitical interests secretly influence these supposedly unbiased demographic lines, or was the decision strictly based on the flawed data they had available? It's a tough question, and one that demands we look really carefully at the historical records. This brings us to part 3, the hidden border. 2 days of blind independence. Because right here, the story takes a staggering turn. Radcliffe actually finishes the boundary lines just before the August 15th independence date, but the maps were deliberately hidden from the public. Just look at how this timeline unfolds. It's one of the most staggering administrative failures in modern history. The lines are finished by August 13th. Then, on August 14th and 15th, massive independence ceremonies are held. Millions of people are celebrating in the streets, having absolutely no idea which country they actually live in. Officials actively withheld the maps for political convenience. They basically hoped the celebrations wouldn't be overshadowed by the visible chaos of these new borders. The maps weren't finally published until August 17th. Part 4, the tragic migration, when the maps came out. Imagine waking up on August 17th to find that your ancestral home, your farm, your entire community was suddenly on the wrong side of a foreign border. The delayed release of these maps sparked an immediate, terrifying panic. 14 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. It's estimated that between 14 and 20 million Hindus, Sikhs, and Muslims were instantly displaced, millions fleeing across the newly drawn lines in massive, highly vulnerable convoys. To this day, it remains one of the largest and absolutely most violent mass migrations in human history. Now, historians fiercely debate who is truly to blame for the horrific violence that followed, a tragedy that claimed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives. And again, we're going to look at this neutrally. On one hand, you have the inevitable tragedy camp. They argue that a century of British divide-and-rule colonial policies actively fueled these communal divisions over time. But on the other hand, the local culpability camp argues that local political and religious leaders across all sides made distinct, intentional choices that escalated the fear and the mutual brutality. Both of these are incredibly powerful historical lenses to view this tragedy through. But, history is also deeply human. And amidst all the unspeakable atrocities, humanity did show up. There are widespread, well-documented accounts of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs risking their own lives to hide, escort, and protect neighbors of different faiths during the absolute height of the chaos. It's a vital, powerful reminder of the resilience of communities, even when they're being actively torn apart by lines on a map. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, the unfinished legacy. Why did Radcliffe leave so fast? Well, he actually left India the very next day after finishing his map, before it was even published to the public. He completely refused his hefty £3,000 fee, seemingly not wanting to profit from a job he knew was going to end in tragedy. And, perhaps most wildly for historians today, he allegedly destroyed all of his working notes before departing. This left a permanent shadow over how exactly some of those impossible decisions were actually made. Because of those missing notes, misinformation completely thrives. So let's quickly debunk 3 common myths about the border. First, Radcliffe guessed with no data. Not true. He had data, it was just really outdated and wildly rushed. Second, partition violence started only after the border was announced. Also false. Communal violence had been escalating for months, which, remember, is exactly why the exit was rushed in the first place. And third, Indian and Pakistani leaders had no say. Actually, local leaders fiercely lobbied and negotiated throughout the whole process, playing a highly complex role in that compressed timeline. So what's the big takeaway here? It's how these specific historical events stretch directly into our modern world. The decisions of 1947 are literally still shaping the world today. Those 5 frantic weeks of drawing borders didn't just cause a one-time migration. They laid the absolute groundwork for the heavily militarized, nuclear-armed standoff in Kashmir that still makes global headlines right now in 2026. The pencil lines drawn in that tiny Delhi room are still dictating geopolitics today. All of this leaves us with one final haunting question. Tragic incompetence or a cover-up? Was the creation and the delayed release of the India-Pakistan border simply the result of a rushed bureaucratic nightmare handed to a totally unqualified man? Or was it a deliberately secretive process designed for a fast, clean political exit, regardless of the staggering human cost? Consider the evidence we've covered today. Think about the millions of lives that were on the line. And ask yourself, if you had been handed that pencil, what would you have done differently?